Somewhere in an ancient scroll, written nearly 2,000 years before the first American flag was ever raised, a man on a remote island saw a vision so vast, so violent, and so precise that some believe it was pointing straight at a nation that did not yet exist. A nation of unmatched wealth, a nation that would feed the world, entertain the world, and arm the world. A nation whose fall, according to that vision, would happen in a single hour. Tonight, we're going to ask the question millions of Americans are afraid to ask out loud. Does the Bible predict what happens to America in the end times? And if it does, how much time is left?
If you love the Bible, Jesus, God, and the Christian faith, please subscribe. Now let's continue.
For centuries, prophecy scholars have pored over the books of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation, searching for clues about the nations of the last days. Empires rise and fall in these pages with startling accuracy. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, each one named, each one judged. But there is one glaring silence in these ancient texts: no golden eagle, no stars and stripes, no mention of a republic across the ocean that would one day become the most powerful nation on earth. To some, that silence is proof the Bible has nothing to say about America. To others, that silence is the loudest clue of all. Here is why. When the prophet John received the vision that became the book of Revelation, he was writing from a prison island called Patmos, somewhere near the end of the 1st century. He did not have modern geography. He did not know continents beyond the Roman world even existed. So when he described nations, wars, and a global economic system in his vision, he described them using the only language available to him: symbols, images, and the political landscape of his own era. Many scholars believe that is exactly the point. The prophecy was never meant to name a country by its future title. It was meant to describe a role, a function, a set of characteristics so specific that when the right nation appeared on the world stage, thoughtful readers would recognize it. So let's look at the description first and let the picture form before we ever say the word America. In Revelation chapter 17 and 18, John describes a mysterious entity called Babylon the Great, not the literal ancient city, which was already in ruins by his lifetime, but something he calls the Great City and the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. This Babylon sits on many waters, is clothed in purple and scarlet, is adorned with gold and jewels, and grows rich through trade with merchants across the entire world. The text says the kings of the earth committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth grew wealthy from the abundance of her luxury. When she falls, it happens with terrifying speed. Revelation says in 1 hour her judgment comes, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargo anymore. Stop and think about that description for a moment. A nation that sits on many waters, bordered by 2 vast oceans. A nation known worldwide for wealth, luxury, and excess. A nation whose economy is so deeply tied to nearly every country on earth that its collapse would send shockwaves through global trade in a single day. A nation whose entertainment, fashion, and culture influence nearly every corner of the globe. To many prophecy teachers, this is not a vague coincidence. This is a description that fits one nation on earth today with uncomfortable precision. But scholars are careful here, and we should be too. Babylon, in Revelation, has also been interpreted throughout history as the Roman Empire, as any corrupt world system built on greed and idolatry, or as a symbolic composite of every empire that exalts itself above God. The text itself never gives a modern nation's name. What it gives is a pattern, a warning about what happens to any civilization that trades righteousness for riches, that builds its identity on luxury instead of truth. Whether that pattern finds its final, literal fulfillment in one specific nation, or whether it describes a global system that many nations participate in together, is something even devoted scholars disagree on. Now let's go back further to the Old Testament, because some of the most fascinating theories about America's role in prophecy come not from Revelation, but from the book of Daniel.
In Daniel chapter 2, the prophet interprets a dream given to a Babylonian king, a statue made of different materials, each representing a world empire that would rise and dominate the earth. Gold for Babylon, silver for Medo-Persia, bronze for Greece, iron for Rome, and finally, feet of iron mixed with clay, representing a fractured, divided kingdom that exists just before God establishes his eternal kingdom. Notice something important. This vision accounts for every major empire in human history, up through the end of days, but it never introduces a fifth standalone empire after Rome. Many prophecy teachers believe this is intentional. It suggests that no single new nation, no matter how powerful, becomes the next great world empire in the biblical timeline. Instead, the world fractures into a patchwork of powers, strong in some ways, fragile in others, unable to fully unite, just like iron and clay refusing to bond together. If that interpretation is correct, it tells us something profound about America's prophetic role. America may be the most powerful nation on earth in human history, wealthier and more militarily dominant than Rome ever dreamed of being, and yet it may never be mentioned by name in prophecy, not because it is unimportant, but because in the biblical framework of the last days, it is simply one of many powerful nations, rather than the singular empire that rules the whole earth. Some scholars find this humbling. Others find it deeply unsettling because it suggests America's dominance was never guaranteed to last forever. Let's turn now to another passage many believers point to, Ezekiel chapter 38, the prophecy of Gog and Magog. This passage describes a massive coalition of nations from the north invading the land of Israel in the last days. Names like Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Cush, and Put are listed as allies in this invasion, names that many modern scholars connect to regions like Russia, Iran, Ethiopia, and Libya. Notice who is missing from that list. There is no clear mention of a great Western superpower defending Israel. Some prophecy teachers argue this is significant. If America remains a strong global protector of Israel today, why would it be absent from a prophecy describing the nations surrounding Israel in the last days? There are a few theories. Some believe America is intentionally left out because by the time this invasion happens, America's power and influence will have already diminished, economically, morally, or militarily, no longer significant enough to be named among the major players on the world stage. Others believe America may be referenced indirectly in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 13, where the text mentions the merchants of Tarshish and all its young lions, a group that questions the invasion but does not seem to physically stop it. Some scholars connect Tarshish to the maritime, trading nations of the West, potentially including America and its allies. If that theory holds, it paints a haunting picture, a nation that watches, that questions, that perhaps even objects, but does not act to prevent the events of the last days from unfolding. This is where the investigation gets personal for so many Americans, because underneath all of this prophetic analysis is a deeper, more painful question. Has America wandered from the values that once made it strong? Scripture consistently ties the rise and fall of nations not to military strength or economic power, but to moral and spiritual direction. In the Old Testament, nation after nation is blessed for righteousness and humility, and judged for pride, idolatry, and the shedding of innocent blood. Many pastors and prophecy teachers today point to this pattern and ask whether America's story is beginning to follow the same arc as Babylon, as Sodom, as ancient Israel itself in its darkest seasons, periods of tremendous blessing, followed by moral drift, followed eventually by consequence. This does not mean judgment is certain or that timelines can be calculated. Scripture is clear in Matthew chapter 24 that no one knows the day or the hour, not the angels in heaven, not even the Son, but only the Father. Anyone claiming to know the exact date of end times events is, according to the very text they claim to interpret, speaking beyond what has been revealed. What we can examine responsibly are patterns of what precedes national judgment and national restoration throughout the biblical record, and how those patterns might apply to the nation many of us call home. So what would it actually look like if a nation like Babylon in Revelation 18 were to fall?
The text describes economic collapse as central to the event. Merchants who once sold their goods across the entire earth suddenly find no buyers. Ships that once carried extravagant cargo stand far off, watching smoke rise, afraid to come near. The wealth that took generations to build evaporates within a single day. Some scholars connect this imagery to a currency collapse, a global economic realignment, or the rise of a new digital or centralized financial system referenced later in Revelation 13, a system requiring what the text calls a mark in order to buy or sell at all. Interestingly, prophecy teachers note that for such a global system to exist, the world's current reserve currency and its dominant economic gatekeeper would likely need to lose its singular grip on global trade. If America currently holds that position, its economic decline, whether gradual or sudden, could theoretically be a necessary precursor to the very system Revelation describes.
There's also the question of spiritual influence. Revelation 18 describes Babylon's fall using the language of sorcery, deception, and the seduction of nations. Many prophecy teachers connect this to media, entertainment, and cultural influence, industries in which America has held unmatched global dominance for over a century. Music, film, television, and now digital platforms broadcast American culture into nearly every household on Earth. If that influence continues to steer global values away from the moral framework described throughout Scripture, some believe this cultural export itself becomes part of the very pattern Revelation warns against, a nation that, in the prophet's words, made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. But here is where this investigation takes an unexpected turn, one that changes the entire emotional weight of everything we have covered so far. Because the story of Babylon's fall in Revelation 18 is immediately followed in Revelation 19 by rejoicing in heaven, not because destruction happened, but because righteousness prevailed. And tucked within the warning of chapter 18 is a verse many overlook entirely, verse 4. A voice from heaven cries out, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues." This is not a verse of hopeless doom. It is a verse of invitation. Even if a nation is heading toward the pattern of Babylon, the call is not despair. It is for individuals within that nation to hold fast to a different standard, regardless of what happens around them. This is ultimately the heart of biblical prophecy. It was never given to create fear for fear's sake, or to turn believers into amateur date setters obsessing over headlines. It was given, according to the text itself, so that when these things begin to happen, believers would not lose heart, but would stand firm, sober-minded, and hopeful, because the same book that describes judgment also describes restoration. Revelation 21 promises a new heaven and a new earth, where every tear is wiped away, and death itself is no more. Whatever happens to any nation, America included, Scripture insists this world's story does not end in ruins, it ends in renewal. So will America fall like Babylon? Will it fade quietly like nations before it that lost their place on a world stage? Or does it play a role Scripture never fully spells out, precisely because its future was always meant to be shaped by the choices of the people living within it? The Bible does not hand us a map with America's name circled in red. What it hands us instead is a mirror, a description of pride, wealth, and moral compromise on one side, and humility, justice, and faithfulness on the other, and an invitation to examine, honestly, which direction we are walking. Perhaps that is the most unsettling revelation of all. Not a hidden prophecy waiting to be decoded, but a choice playing out in real time, one generation at a time, one heart at a time, and the ending has not been written yet.